The
This
moment
house
my
belongs
son
to me now,
looked at me
Mother.
across my own dining room
I think
table
it's
and
time you
said,
moved out.
"Mom, this house is mine now." Every sound inside the room disappeared. My granddaughter lowered her eyes.
After
My
everything we
daughter-in-law
discussed, you
folded her
still went
arms,
back there. I want you out of
and
this
I
house
sat
now.
there,
How
68
could you
years
say
old,
that?
staring at the walls my late husband and I had built with our own hands. Then Ethan told me I should move into the small room behind the garage because it made more sense. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't remind him whose name had paid every mortgage payment for 40 years, because earlier that morning my phone had rung, and a woman I hadn't heard from in nearly a decade said only 4 words, "Mrs. Morgan, it's time." Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to hear from you. If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe so we can spend more evenings together. And if you've ever felt overlooked by someone you loved, leave me a comment and tell me your thoughts. I also enjoy seeing where everyone is watching from, so share your city and the current time where you are tonight. 5 years before my son told me that my house belonged to him, I still believed I had raised a good man. My name is Kylie Morgan. I am 68 years old, and for nearly 40 years, I lived in the same brick house outside Columbus, Ohio. The maple tree in the front yard was planted the summer my oldest son turned 5. The white fence along the driveway was built by my husband Robert during a rainy weekend in 1989. Every room carried fingerprints from our lives. That house was never simply a house. It was our marriage. Robert and I had started with almost nothing. He worked construction during the day and repaired machinery at night. I taught 3rd grade at a local elementary school for nearly 30 years. We counted every dollar. There were winters when we lowered the thermostat to save money, and summers when we canceled vacations because one of the boys needed braces. But we built a life. We built stability, and eventually we built that house. Robert used to stand in the backyard every evening with a cup of coffee and say, "Kylie, one day we'll sit here as old people and watch our grandchildren run around this yard." For a long time, he was right. When Ethan was young, he had his father's smile. He was protective, responsible, and kind. If I became sick, he brought me soup. If Robert worked late, Ethan would help his younger brother Daniel finish homework. I remember one winter when Daniel fell while skating on the pond behind our neighborhood. Ethan was only 14, but he jumped into the freezing water without hesitation to pull his brother out. People used to tell me how lucky I was, and I believed them. Daniel, my younger son, was always quieter. He loved books, computers, and spending time alone. After college, he accepted a job in North Carolina and eventually settled there. He called every week, sometimes twice. Ethan stayed in Ohio. When he married Melissa 15 years ago, I welcomed her into our family with open arms. She was beautiful, organized, and ambitious. She worked in real estate and seemed determined to build a successful life. At first, I admired her confidence. She brought expensive wine to dinners and talked about investments, retirement accounts, and financial planning. Robert liked her too, at least in the beginning. But after Robert died, something changed. His heart attack happened suddenly. One morning, he was trimming hedges. That afternoon, he was gone. The silence he left behind was larger than grief itself. For months, I couldn't enter his workshop. His coffee mug remained beside the sink. His reading glasses sat on the nightstand exactly where he had left them. People tell you that grief gets easier. What they don't tell you is that loneliness changes shape. Some days it feels like sadness. Other days it feels like an empty chair. During the first year after Robert died, Ethan visited every Sunday. He helped mow the lawn, fixed broken cabinets, and brought groceries. I remember thinking that Robert would be proud. But little by little, those visits changed. Ethan became distracted. Melissa always seemed impatient. Conversations that once centered on family slowly turned toward money. Mom, have you thought about downsizing? You don't need all this space anymore. The market is excellent right now. You could make a lot of money selling. At first, I assumed they were concerned about me. Many people my age move into smaller homes. Some relocate near their children. Some enter retirement communities. But I never wanted that. This house still contained Robert. His jackets remained in the closet. His tools rested in the garage. Every corner carried memories that money could never replace. One evening, while washing dishes after dinner, Melissa casually asked, "Have you updated your estate paperwork?" I dried my hands slowly. "Not recently." She nodded. "You really should. It avoids problems later." Ethan added, "We're only thinking about you, Mom." I smiled. I appreciate that. But something about the conversation felt strange. A few weeks later, Ethan asked where I kept the deed to the house. I looked at him. "Why?" "Oh, nothing. I was just curious." "Curious about what?" He laughed. "Property records and stuff." The answer didn't satisfy me. After that, I began noticing things I had ignored before. Melissa would ask whether the mortgage had been fully paid. She asked about insurance policies. She wanted to know if I had investments. She even asked whether I planned to leave equal inheritances to both sons. Questions that felt practical on the surface somehow left me uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Daniel never asked about money. He asked if I was sleeping. He asked if I was eating properly. He asked whether I wanted him to visit. The distance between my two sons suddenly felt much larger than the miles between Ohio and North Carolina. One October afternoon, I sat on my back porch watching leaves fall across the yard Robert loved. The air smelled like wood smoke. I could almost hear his footsteps. My friend Linda Carter arrived carrying pumpkin bread. Linda and I had known each other since high school. She had buried her own husband 8 years earlier and understood the strange loneliness of widowhood. We sat together under blankets. She listened while I talked. When I mentioned Ethan's questions about money, Linda became unusually quiet. "Kylie," she said carefully. "Has he always asked those things?" "No." "And Melissa?" I hesitated. "Mostly Melissa." Linda looked directly at me. "Promise me something." "What?" "Don't sign anything without reading every word." I laughed softly. "You think I'm that foolish?" "No," she said. "I think you're a mother." The words stayed with me. Because mothers forgive, mothers trust. Mothers explain away behavior that would concern them if it came from anyone else. That night, I walked through the house turning off lights. The dining room, the kitchen, the hallway. I paused beside Robert's photograph. He was smiling in the picture, holding a fishing rod beside Lake Erie. "I miss you," I whispered. The following Sunday, Ethan arrived alone. Melissa had work, he said. He sat at the kitchen table and stirred his coffee. Then he asked the question that made something cold settle inside my chest. "Mom, where do you keep all your important papers?" I looked at him. "What papers?" "The house, insurance, legal documents." I set my cup down. "Why do you want to know?" He avoided my eyes. "Oh, just planning ahead." For the first time in my life, my own son felt like a stranger sitting across from me. And although I didn't know it then, that conversation was the beginning of everything that would eventually tear our family apart. The first time Ethan asked me to transfer the house, he smiled while doing it. That was what made it so difficult. If he had shouted or demanded anything, I would have recognized the danger immediately. But he sat across from me at my kitchen table one Saturday afternoon, stirring his coffee exactly the way his father used to, and spoke as if he were doing me a favor. "Mom, Melissa and I have been discussing something. I folded a dish towel and waited. We've been thinking about opening our own business. Melissa smiled beside him. A property management company. I nodded politely. That sounds exciting. Ethan leaned forward. We've talked to a lender. Something in his voice made me put down my coffee cup. And the bank wants additional collateral. Melissa quickly added, only temporarily. I frowned. What does that mean? She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. We thought maybe you could transfer the house into Ethan's name for a while. Once the business is established, everything would be protected. The room became very quiet. I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. My house. It's only paperwork, Ethan said. Melissa nodded. Families do this all the time. I looked from one face to the other. Why would I transfer my house? Ethan sighed. Mom, you're 68. The number landed heavily. As people get older, these things become complicated. I sat back in my chair. I've managed my affairs for a long time. Nobody's saying you haven't. Melissa smiled again, but it felt rehearsed. We're simply planning ahead. I picked up my coffee. I appreciate your concern, but I'm not interested. The smile disappeared from Melissa's face. Ethan forced a laugh. You don't even want to think about it. No. He exchanged a quick glance with his wife. For the first time, I noticed how often they seemed to communicate without speaking. The conversation moved on after that, but the air in my kitchen felt different. When they left, I stood at the front window and watched them sit in the driveway for several minutes before driving away. Something about that bothered me. That evening, I walked through Robert's workshop. His tools still hung neatly on the wall. His old radio sat beside the workbench. Dust covered the corner where he used to repair lawn equipment for neighbors. I sat in his chair. Am I imagining this? I asked the empty room. Of course, there was no answer. But for the first time since Robert died, I wished desperately that he were sitting beside me. The following week, Ethan called. How are you doing, Mom? I'm fine. Have you thought about what we discussed? I paused. Ethan, I already answered. I know, I just thought maybe you needed time. I don't want to transfer the house. He was silent. Then he said, It's not like you can take it with you. The words hurt more than he realized, perhaps more than he intended. After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room for nearly an hour. My husband had been dead for 5 years. Apparently, my son had already begun measuring what remained. A few days later, Melissa stopped by unexpectedly. She brought blueberry muffins. She complimented my curtains. She asked about my health, and then she returned to the subject. Kylie, you know we're only trying to help. I know. You shouldn't have to worry about finances. I don't. She crossed her legs. Managing property can become difficult at your age. I looked at her. I still drive. Yes. I still pay my bills. Of course. I still handle my taxes. She smiled tightly. I'm simply saying that planning ahead is smart. I could hear the frustration beneath her politeness. She wanted me to agree. She wanted me to feel old. She wanted me to believe I needed them. That evening I called Daniel. My younger son answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom. Hearing his voice immediately calmed me. Are you busy? Never too busy for you? I hesitated. Ethan and Melissa asked me to transfer the house. There was silence. What? They want to use it for a business loan. Another pause. Did you say yes? No? Good. The answer came quickly. I sat straighter. You don't think I'm overreacting? No? Maybe they're only trying to help. Mom. His voice softened. Dad built that house. I know. You don't owe anyone your home. I swallowed. I don't want to cause problems. You're not causing them. After we finished talking, I felt slightly better, but I also felt guilty. A mother always worries about choosing between her children. Even at 68, especially at 68. The next Sunday, Linda Carter came over for lunch. She brought chicken salad and iced tea. We sat on the back porch while autumn leaves drifted through the yard. I finally told her everything. The business, the paperwork, the phone calls, the pressure. Linda listened carefully. Then she asked a question. How many times have they asked now? I counted. 5. She frowned. That's not concern, Kylie. I looked down. Then what is it? She took a long breath. Pressure. I didn't answer. Because deep inside, I had already begun to fear she was right. A few days later, I stopped at the grocery store. As I reached for a carton of milk, I heard Melissa speaking nearby. She didn't see me. She was talking on her phone. If we can get the house, the bank will approve everything. My hands froze. She continued. No, it's worth much more than they think. My heart began to pound. Then she turned. Our eyes met. For a brief second, neither of us spoke. Oh, Kylie. She quickly smiled. I didn't know you were here. I nodded. Neither of us mentioned the conversation, but something had changed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the dark house, listening to old floorboards creak beneath my feet. The grandfather clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped against the windows. I entered my bedroom and opened Robert's closet. His blue jacket still hung there. I touched the sleeve. You always knew people better than I did, I whispered. The following Sunday, Ethan arrived alone. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked tired, almost nervous. Mom, I need to ask something. I folded my hands. Where do you keep all your important documents? The question felt different this time. Direct, careful, intentional. What documents? The deed, insurance papers, legal records. I stared at him. Why? He rubbed his hands together. I'm just trying to help organize things. I didn't ask for help. He looked away. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he stood. You know, Melissa and I worry about you. I appreciate that. You shouldn't have to handle everything alone. I walked him to the door. Before leaving, he turned. You'll think about it. I forced a small smile. I've already thought about it. After he left, I stood in the doorway long after his car disappeared. For the first time in my entire life, I locked the front door because of my own son. And although I still loved Ethan, a quiet fear had begun growing inside me. Not fear that I would lose my house, but fear that I was beginning to lose my son. Thanksgiving had always belonged to Robert. Even after his death, I still followed his traditions. The turkey went into the oven before sunrise. The dining table was covered with the cream-colored cloth we had used for nearly 20 years. His favorite jazz records played softly in the kitchen while I cooked. For 5 years after losing him preparing Thanksgiving dinner, made me feel as though he still walked through the house. That year, however, everything felt different. 3 days before the holiday, Ethan called. Mom, Melissa, and I want to help this year. I smiled. That would be nice. We'll invite a few people. Who? Melissa's sister, her husband, maybe a couple of friends. I hesitated. Thanksgiving has always been family. It still is. Something in his voice made me uneasy. Daniel called that same evening. I'm sorry, Mom. I can't make it this year. My heart sank. His company had assigned him to a major project in Charlotte, and he wouldn't be able to leave until after the holiday. I understand. I'll come for Christmas. It's okay. But after we hung up, I cried. It would be my first Thanksgiving without Robert and without Daniel. Only Ethan would be there. I told myself that should have been enough. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived cold and gray. I woke before dawn and began cooking, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green beans, pumpkin pie. Everything Robert had loved. By noon, the house smelled like butter and sage. For a few hours, I felt peaceful. Then the guests arrived. Melissa's sister, Karen. Her husband, Mike. 2 neighbors I barely knew. Ethan and Melissa. Emily and Jack. The house suddenly felt crowded. People filled the living room carrying wine glasses and discussing mortgages, interest rates, and home values. I sat quietly. At one point, I noticed Melissa showing people the kitchen. We've always thought about remodeling this space. She spoke as if the house already belonged to her. I tried to ignore it. When dinner was finally served, everyone took their seats. Robert's chair remained empty. As always, no one sat there. No one ever would. I bowed my head. Lord, thank you for our family. Thank you for the years we've shared and for the people we love. My voice nearly broke when I added Robert's name. When I opened my eyes, I noticed Ethan looking uncomfortable. Dinner began normally. Emily talked about school. Jack described his baseball season. Karen discussed vacations. For a moment, I thought perhaps I had worried unnecessarily. Then Melissa spoke. Kylie, have you thought any more about the property? The room became quiet. I set down my fork. Not really. Ethan cleared his throat. Mom and I have discussed some future planning. Nobody said anything. Melissa smiled politely. At some point, Ethan will inherit the house anyway. I looked at her. I have 2 sons. Of course. She took a sip of wine. But Ethan lives here. Karen nodded. That makes sense? I suddenly felt like a guest at my own table. Ethan leaned back. I've told Mom that eventually the house should stay with the family. I tried to keep my voice calm. It already is with the family. Melissa laughed softly. You know what we mean. Emily looked down at her plate. Jack stopped eating. The children understood more than the adults realized. I turned toward Ethan. This isn't the time. But he continued. Mom, you're almost 70. The words hit harder than I expected. And you don't need this much house. Karen nodded again. So many older people downsize. I looked around the table. No one defended me. No one changed the subject. No one said that the house belonged to me. The walls suddenly felt very far away. Then Ethan said something that made my chest tighten. Dad would have wanted us to keep the house. I stared at him. You don't know what your father wanted. I was his son. And I was his wife. Silence. Melissa reached for Ethan's hand. Nobody is attacking you, Kylie. But it felt exactly like an attack. I excused myself and walked into the kitchen. My hands trembled as I stood beside the sink. After a few moments, Emily quietly entered. She was 14 now, tall and thoughtful. She reminded me of Daniel. "Grandma?" I turned. "Yes, sweetheart." She lowered her voice. "Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine." She looked toward the dining room. "Dad's being weird." My throat tightened. "Go enjoy your dinner." She hugged me, only briefly, but long enough for me to realize how desperately I needed it. When I returned to the table, the conversation had shifted to property values. Mike was discussing the local housing market. Karen mentioned investment opportunities. Melissa talked about home equity, and Ethan said words that I will never forget. "This house could solve a lot of problems." I looked at him. "What problems?" "Our future." Melissa immediately added, "The business." I suddenly understood something. This dinner had never been about family. It had been a presentation, an audience, witnesses, people who would later say they had heard me discuss the house, people who would confirm that Ethan had always intended to take responsibility. I pushed my plate away. "I'm tired." Ethan frowned. "We haven't finished." "I have." I stood. No one moved. No one stopped me. As I reached the hallway, I heard Karen whisper, "She's emotional." Melissa answered quietly, "It's difficult for older people to accept change." Older people. The phrase followed me upstairs. I sat alone in my bedroom. The sounds of conversation drifted upward through the floor. Laughter, glasses, voices, my house, my dining room, my kitchen. And yet I had never felt so unwelcome. I looked at Robert's photograph. "I miss you," I whispered. Downstairs, I heard Ethan's voice, confident, comfortable, as if he already belonged there. Nearly an hour later, the guests began leaving. Melissa hugged me. "Thank you for dinner." I nodded. Karen smiled politely. Mike shook my hand. Eventually, only Ethan remained. He stood beside the front door. "You embarrassed me tonight." I stared at him. "I embarrassed you." "You made everyone uncomfortable." I folded my arms. "This discussion should never have happened." He sighed. "Mom, someday the house will be mine anyway." The sentence hung between us, cold, certain, as though he had already decided the future. I answered quietly, "Nothing belongs to you until it does." His expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. For the first time in my life, I saw impatience in my son's eyes when he looked at me. Not love, not concern, impatience, as if I had become an obstacle. After he left, I locked the door. The house was silent. I walked into the dining room. Half-empty glasses sat on the table. The candles had burned low. Robert's chair remained empty. I placed my hand on its back. And suddenly, I realized something that frightened me. This had not been an awkward family conversation. It had been a rehearsal, a plan. And somewhere inside that plan, my role had already changed. I was no longer the owner of the house. I was simply the woman standing in the way. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I woke up feeling as though something inside my house had shifted. Nothing looked different. The same morning, sunlight entered through the kitchen windows. The same coffee maker hissed on the counter. Robert's old clock still ticked in the hallway. But the feeling remained. I had spent 40 years building that home, and for the first time, it no longer felt entirely safe. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Ethan. "Morning, Mom." Good morning. I was thinking about stopping by after work. All right. I still have the spare key. I paused. Yes, that makes things easier. Something about the statement bothered me. After Robert died, Ethan had kept a spare key in case of emergencies. At the time, it had comforted me. Now, it unsettled me. That afternoon, I drove to the grocery store. When I returned, Ethan's truck was already parked outside. He was inside my garage. "What are you doing?" I asked. He turned around. "Just checking some things." "Checking what?" "The furnace." I frowned. "I didn't ask you to." He wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm trying to help." I wanted to believe him. I truly did. But lately, every act of help seemed to come with invisible strings. That evening, he walked through the basement. He inspected the water heater. He looked at the electrical panel. Then, he stood in the kitchen. "You really should replace the roof in a few years." "The roof is fine. Property maintenance gets expensive." I remained quiet. Then he added, "It would be easier if I handled some of this." "What do you mean?" "Bills, repairs, insurance." "I already handle those things." His expression changed. "You don't have to do everything yourself." The words sounded kind. The tone did not. After he left, I sat in Robert's recliner and stared at the television without actually watching it. I remembered something my husband once said. When people want control, they usually ask for responsibility first. At the time, he had been talking about business. Now the sentence returned to me. The following week, Melissa came by carrying folders. "I thought I'd help organize your finances." I looked at the papers. "What finances?" "Insurance information." "I have it." "Retirement accounts?" "I have those too." She sat down at my kitchen table. "Kylie, we're only trying to make sure nothing falls through the cracks." I folded my arms. "Nothing has." She opened one of the folders. "There are programs for seniors." "I'm not applying for programs." "There are financial protections." "I don't need those either." Her smile disappeared. "You don't trust us." The question surprised me. "I didn't say that." "You act like we're trying to steal something." The room became very quiet, because the truth was, I had begun wondering exactly that. I didn't answer. She gathered her papers. As she walked toward the door, she stopped. "You know, Ethan worries about you all the time." The statement sounded less like love and more like guilt. That night, I called Linda. "I feel terrible." "Why?" "Because I keep questioning my own son." Linda was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Questioning someone isn't the same as accusing them." "I don't want to think badly of Ethan." "You don't have to." "What if they're only trying to help?" "Kylie, has anyone ever helped you by repeatedly asking for your house?" I had no answer. A few days later, something happened that frightened me. I opened my mailbox and found a bank advertisement addressed to Ethan, at my address. Not his, mine. I stared at the envelope. When Ethan visited that weekend, I handed it to him. "This came for you." He looked surprised. "Oh, why is the bank using my address?" He shrugged. "Probably a mistake." But his eyes moved away. That evening after he left, I sat in my bedroom thinking about Robert. He had always handled paperwork, taxes, insurance, mortgage payments. I trusted him completely. After his death, I had slowly learned to manage everything myself. The files were stored in a small cabinet in our bedroom closet. The insurance policies, property taxes, investment statements, the deed. I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to check them. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was fear. I opened the cabinet. Everything appeared normal. But as I searched through the folders, I noticed that one file was slightly out of place. I couldn't explain why. Maybe I had moved it myself. Maybe not. My heart began to beat faster. The next morning, I purchased a small lock for the cabinet. I felt foolish doing it. Who locks papers away from their own family? Apparently, I did. A few days later, Daniel called. "How are you doing?" I hesitated. Honestly, yes. I feel like something's wrong. What happened? I told him about the bank envelope, the questions, the paperwork, the pressure. He listened carefully. Then he asked, "Have you checked Dad's things?" "What things?" "The old boxes in the garage." I frowned. "What boxes?" Dad kept everything. I remembered several storage boxes stacked in Robert's workshop. I hadn't touched them since his funeral. "There may be important papers." "Why would he leave them there?" Dad always prepared for everything. After we hung up, I went to the garage. The workshop smelled exactly as it always had. Oil, wood, dust, memories. Robert's workbench stood against the wall. His tools still hung neatly above it. In the corner sat several old storage boxes. I pulled one toward me. Old tax returns, receipts, photographs. Another box contained manuals and insurance records. Then I found a smaller wooden chest. I had forgotten it existed. Robert used it for personal papers. The lock wasn't secured. Inside were several envelopes, military records, letters, documents, and beneath them, a large envelope sealed with tape. My name was written across the front. Kylie. Only that. No date, no explanation. My hands began to tremble. I sat down in Robert's chair. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. Why had he never given it to me? When had he written it? Why had it remained hidden? I heard the garage door creak in the wind. The workshop suddenly felt colder. I touched Robert's handwriting. I could almost hear his voice. The phone rang inside the house. I ignored it. For the first time in months, nothing else seemed important. Not Ethan, not Melissa, not the house, only the envelope resting in my lap. The man I had loved for 43 years had left me something he had never mentioned, something he apparently wanted me to find. I slowly ran my fingers beneath the tape. Then I stopped, because suddenly I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I placed the envelope back inside the wooden chest. I closed the lid, and as I stood to leave the workshop, I looked back at Robert's empty chair. For the first time since he died, I had the strange feeling that my husband had been trying to protect me long after he was gone. I just didn't yet understand from whom. I waited 2 days before opening the envelope. For 2 days, it remained inside Robert's wooden chest while I walked around the house pretending nothing had changed. I watered the plants. I paid the electric bill. I attended church on Sunday. I spoke with Linda. I smiled at neighbors. But every time I passed the garage, I thought about Robert's handwriting. Kylie. Only my name. No explanation, no date, just my name. On Tuesday evening, snow began falling outside. The first snow of the season had always been Robert's favorite. He used to sit by the living room window with a blanket and hot coffee watching the flakes settle over the backyard. I made myself a cup of tea. Then I walked into the workshop. The old lamp above Robert's workbench still worked. Its yellow light filled the room. I sat in his chair. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, several legal documents, and a business card. I recognized Robert's handwriting immediately. My dear Kylie, if you are reading this, then something has happened that made you search for answers. Perhaps I am gone. Perhaps life has become more difficult than we imagined. And perhaps someone you love is asking you to give away something you should never surrender. I stopped reading, my eyes filled with tears. Robert had written these words years earlier. He continued, "You trust people because that is who you are. It is one of the reasons I fell in love with you. But trust and protection are not the same thing. I have arranged several things that I pray you will never need. If our children remain the men we raised, these papers may never matter. If they change, please contact Grace Whitmore. She will know what to do." For a long time, I simply sat there. The snow tapped softly against the garage windows. The heater hummed, and suddenly, my husband felt closer than he had in years. I picked up the business card. Grace Whitmore, Notary Public. The address was only 20 minutes away. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered. Grace had attended our anniversary party nearly 15 years earlier. She and Robert had once worked together on a community board. Why had he trusted her? What exactly had he arranged? I continued reading. There was another paragraph. Kylie, if you ever feel pressured, frightened, or alone, remember this: the house belongs to the life we built together. No one is entitled to it simply because they expect it. No one. I covered my mouth with my hand. Robert had seen something. Or perhaps he had simply understood human nature better than I did. Beneath the letter lay several legal papers. Most of them made little sense to me. There were signatures, dates, official seals, and Grace Whitmore's name appeared several times. One document had been notarized nearly 12 years earlier. Another was placed inside a sealed folder. Across the front were words written in Robert's handwriting. Open only if necessary. I suddenly heard a noise inside the house. The front door. My heart jumped. I quickly returned everything to the envelope. A moment later, Ethan called from the kitchen. "Mom!" I walked inside. "What are you doing here?" He smiled. "I brought groceries." I looked at the bags. Milk, bread, coffee, things I normally purchased myself. "You didn't need to." He placed the bags on the counter. "I was worried about the weather." Outside, snow continued falling. "I appreciate it." He looked around the kitchen. "Have you thought any more about the business?" The question came so quickly that my stomach tightened. "No," he sighed. "We could really use your help." "I've already answered." "Mom?" "No." For several seconds, he stared at me. Then his voice softened. "You know, Melissa and I are trying to build something. And I wish you success. This could help all of us." I thought about Robert's letter. No one is entitled to it. "I don't want to discuss it." His jaw tightened. He looked exactly like Robert when he became frustrated, but Robert had never looked at me with impatience, only concern, only love. Ethan finally nodded. "Fine." He left shortly afterward. As I watched his truck disappear into the snow, I realized something. For months, I had been defending him, explaining him, making excuses. But Robert's letter had introduced another possibility. What if my instincts had been right? The following morning, I called Linda. "I found something." "What?" "A letter." "From Robert." "Yes." She became quiet. "What did it say?" "He told me to contact someone named Grace Whitmore." Linda immediately recognized the name. The notary. You know her. Everyone knows Grace. She's been handling documents around town for years. I hesitated. Should I call? Linda answered without hesitation. Absolutely. I stared at the business card for nearly an hour before dialing. An older woman answered. Grace Whitmore speaking. For a moment I couldn't speak. My name is Kylie Morgan. Silence. Then Robert Morgan's wife. My heart stopped. Yes. Her voice changed immediately. Oh my goodness. You remember him? Of course I remember Robert. I swallowed. I found something he left. There was another silence. Then she asked quietly, Did he tell you to call me? Yes. Her voice became very gentle. Kylie, how are you? I almost cried. Nobody had asked me that question in weeks. I'm not sure. I understand. She paused. Would you like to meet? Yes. Tomorrow morning. Please. After we ended the call, I sat alone in my kitchen. The snow continued falling. The house was quiet. For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. The next morning, I drove carefully through the snow. Grace's office occupied a small brick building near downtown. She was 72 years old. White hair, warm eyes, a navy sweater. When she saw me enter, she stood immediately. Kylie. She hugged me, and somehow, without even knowing her well, I began to cry. She guided me into her office. I was wondering if this day would ever come. What do you mean? She looked at Robert's letter. Your husband planned carefully. I sat forward. Planned what? She folded her hands. Robert loved you very much. I know. He worried about what might happen after he was gone. I felt my chest tighten. He never told me. He hoped he wouldn't have to. She opened a locked drawer. Inside was a thick file. On the front was written, Morgan family. My breath caught. Robert left instructions. I stared at the file. What kind of instructions? Grace looked directly at me. Before we discuss anything, I need to ask you a question. What question? She spoke very softly. Kylie, is someone pressuring you regarding your home? I looked out the window. Snow covered the sidewalks. Cars moved slowly through the street. For several seconds, I couldn't answer, because saying it aloud would make it real. Finally, I looked back at her, and for the first time in my life, I admitted something I had been afraid to say. I think my son may be trying to take my house. Grace closed the file. She reached across the desk and placed her hand over mine. Then she said words that changed everything. Robert prepared for that possibility. I hardly slept after meeting Grace Whitmore. The snow had stopped by the time I returned home, but the world outside still looked frozen. The trees stood motionless. The streets were covered in white. Even the neighborhood seemed quieter than usual. Inside, my purse rested copies of documents I still didn't fully understand. Trust agreements, notarized instructions, legal language that felt both comforting and frightening. Grace had not explained everything. Not yet. Instead, before I left her office, she had looked directly into my eyes. Kylie, do not sign anything. I nodded. If Ethan asks, still no? What if he becomes angry? Grace folded her hands. Then you'll learn something important. As I drove home, Robert's words kept returning to me. No one is entitled to it. No one. The next few days were strangely peaceful. too peaceful. Ethan didn't call. Melissa didn't visit. No questions. No conversations about the house. Part of me wondered if perhaps everything had finally ended. Then Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Ethan? His voice sounded cheerful. Mom, are you free Monday morning? Why? I scheduled an appointment. What kind of appointment? Just some paperwork. My stomach tightened. What paperwork? It's nothing complicated. I'd like to know. He hesitated. A lawyer. I remained silent. Melissa and I spoke to an estate attorney. I didn't ask you to. We're trying to help you. What attorney? He gave me a name I didn't recognize. And why am I going? So everything can be organized. My fingers tightened around the phone. I don't think that's necessary. His voice changed slightly. Mom, please. I already said no. It's only one meeting. I looked at Robert's letter lying beside me on the table. Grace's warning echoed in my mind. Do not sign anything. Finally, I said, I'll listen. That answer seemed to satisfy him. Good. I'll pick you up Monday morning. After hanging up, I immediately called Grace. He made an appointment with a lawyer. What kind of lawyer? Estate planning. She became quiet. Did he tell you the purpose? No. And he wants you there? Yes. Grace took a slow breath. Go. My heart skipped. You want me to? Yes. What if they pressure me? She answered calmly. Then don't sign. The weekend felt endless. Saturday morning, I walked through the house touching familiar things. Robert's books, his chair, the kitchen counter where we had shared coffee every morning for nearly 4 decades. I kept wondering what he would tell me. Would he be angry? Disappointed? Or had he somehow foreseen all of this? Sunday evening, Daniel called. How are you? I told him about the meeting. There was silence. I don't like it. Neither do I. Do you want me to come? No. You sure? I'll be fine. But after we ended the call, I realized I wasn't sure at all. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. Ethan appeared exactly at 9. He smiled. Ready? I put on my coat. The drive downtown was uncomfortable. The radio played softly. Neither of us spoke much. Finally, Ethan said, You know I'm only trying to help. I looked out the window. I know that's what you say. He gripped the steering wheel. You don't believe me anymore. The question hurt, because once I had trusted him more than anyone except Robert. I don't know what to believe. He didn't answer. The law office occupied a modern building with glass walls and expensive furniture. Melissa was already waiting. She stood and hugged me. You look nice. Thank you. The receptionist led us into a conference room. A younger attorney entered, perhaps 40 years old. He introduced himself. Mr. Collins. He shook my hand. Then he placed several folders on the table. Ethan sat beside me. Melissa sat across from us. Immediately, I felt trapped. Mr. Collins smiled. Ethan explained that you're interested in simplifying your estate. I looked at him. I don't remember saying that. He glanced toward Ethan. Perhaps I misunderstood. Ethan spoke quickly. Mom wants everything organized. No, I said quietly. The room became still. Mr. Collins opened a folder. There are several options. He began discussing transfer on death arrangements, property ownership, joint tenancy, asset management. Much of the language sounded familiar after my meeting with Grace, but one phrase caught my attention. Co-owner. I looked down at the document. Ethan's name appeared. My name appeared. The house address appeared. I felt my heartbeat quicken. "What is this?" Mr. Collins answered. "A shared ownership arrangement." I looked at Ethan. "You want your name on my house?" His face tightened. "Eventually, it would make things easier." "For whom?" Melissa leaned forward. "Kylie, this protects everyone." "From what?" "Inheritance problems." I looked at the papers. My husband's house. My house. Our life, reduced to signatures, boxes, lines. Mr. Collins slid a pen toward me. "There is no pressure." The lie sat heavily in the room, because pressure was exactly what I felt. Ethan spoke softly. "Mom, we're family." I stared at him. Family. The words sounded different now. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. His expression changed. "What do you mean?" "You've asked repeatedly. We need to plan." "For my death," Melissa sighed. "Nobody said that." "But everyone keeps talking about what happens after I'm gone." Nobody answered. The attorney adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Morgan, there is no obligation." I placed the pen back on the table. "I'm not signing." Silence. Ethan blinked. "What? I'm not signing." Melissa spoke first. "Kylie." "No." Ethan leaned closer. "Mom, at least think about it." "I have." "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The sentence felt dangerous. Harder for whom I stood. The attorney rose. "We can schedule another meeting." "There won't be another meeting." Ethan stood beside me. His face had become red. "You're embarrassing me." The same words he had used after Thanksgiving. I looked directly at him. "No, Ethan." My voice surprised even me. "I'm protecting myself." Melissa suddenly lost her composure. "We've done everything for you." I turned toward her. "Everything—" She crossed her arms. "We help you constantly." "I never asked you to take my house?" The room fell silent. Mr. Collins looked deeply uncomfortable. Ethan lowered his voice. "Can we please discuss this privately?" "No." He stared at me, and for the first time in his life my son looked genuinely angry with me, not frustrated, not disappointed, angry. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched, and then Melissa said something she probably regretted. "If you don't trust your own son, who do you trust?" Immediately, Robert's letter appeared in my mind. "You trust people because that is who you are." I looked at both of them. Then I answered. "My husband." Neither of them spoke. I walked toward the door. Ethan followed me into the hallway. "Mom!" I turned. His voice was colder than I had ever heard it. "This isn't over." For several seconds, I simply looked at him. Then I answered quietly. "No." I stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw Ethan standing beside Melissa, and suddenly I understood something terrifying. They had expected me to sign. They had come prepared. The lawyer, the documents, the explanations, the pen, everything. And now, for the first time, their patience was beginning to disappear. For nearly 2 weeks after the meeting with the lawyer, Ethan barely spoke to me. The silence should have brought me peace. Instead, it frightened me. When children are young, mothers Learn to recognize different kinds of silence. There is the silence of sadness, the silence of disappointment, the silence of fear. And then there is the silence that comes before anger. Christmas was only 3 weeks away. The neighborhood had begun decorating their homes. White lights appeared on rooftops, wreaths hung from front doors. Music drifted from nearby houses in the evenings. But my own home felt colder every day. Ethan stopped calling. Melissa no longer visited. Emily texted me twice asking if I was all right. Jack sent me a photograph of a school project. Neither child mentioned their parents. One afternoon, Grace called. "How are things?" "Quiet." She hesitated. "Be careful of quiet." I looked out the window. "What do you mean?" "People who expect something sometimes become desperate when they realize they won't receive it." The words unsettled me. That night, I locked every door. For the first time in 40 years. A few days later, Ethan arrived unexpectedly. He entered with his spare key before I even reached the front door. I stared at him. "You could have knocked." He removed his coat. "I've always used the key." Something about his tone had changed. No apology, no warmth, only certainty. Melissa entered behind him. "We need to talk." My stomach tightened. I led them into the kitchen. Nobody sat. Ethan remained standing. Melissa folded her arms. The room immediately felt smaller. "I spoke to the attorney again," Ethan said. "I didn't ask you to. He believes you're making a mistake." I looked at him. "The attorney works for you. He works for everyone." "No." I kept my voice calm. "He works for whoever pays him." Melissa sighed heavily. "Kylie, this can't continue." "What can't continue?" "This uncertainty." I almost laughed. Uncertainty. I had lived in this house for 40 years. There had been no uncertainty until they created it. Ethan pulled out a chair. "Mom, let's be honest." I sat down slowly. "All right." "You live alone." "Yes." "You're getting older." There it was again. Older. The word had become a weapon. He continued. "The house is too much." "I disagree." "The repairs. I manage them. The bills. I pay them. The property taxes. I pay those too." Melissa interrupted. "You don't understand the future." I looked at her. "What future?" She exchanged a glance with Ethan. "The house should stay with Ethan." The sentence hung in the air. Should. Not could. Not someday. Should. "As far as I know," I said quietly, "it already belongs to me." Ethan's patience finally broke. "That's not what Dad wanted." The mention of Robert made my chest tighten. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." "No, Ethan." He stepped closer. "He would have wanted the family protected." I stood. "Your father wanted me protected." Silence. Melissa spoke first. "You're twisting things." I thought about the trust, the letters, Grace, Robert's warnings. No, I wasn't twisting anything. For the first time in years, I was finally seeing clearly. The argument ended without resolution. They left. But before walking out, Ethan said something that stayed with me. "This situation can't stay the way it is." The next weekend, Daniel called. He planned to visit before Christmas. "I'll stay a few days." Relief washed over me. "That would be nice." "You sound tired." "I am. He hesitated. Mom, has Ethan done anything? No, but I wasn't sure that was true, because emotional pressure leaves no bruises. 3 days later, I discovered that Ethan had changed the online password for one of the utility accounts, the electric company. He had originally helped me set up automatic payments after Robert died. Now I couldn't access it. I called him. "Oh, I forgot to tell you. Why would you change it?" "I was organizing things." "I didn't ask you to." His voice grew impatient. "I was helping. Please give me the password." "I'll take care of it." "No." Silence. "I said I want the password." He eventually gave it to me, but after hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table shaking. Something was happening. Slowly. Quietly. Piece by piece. Not one large action. Many small ones. Control. Responsibility. Access. Authority. The following Sunday, everything exploded. Ethan and Melissa arrived with the children. I had invited them for dinner. Part of me still believed we could repair things. The meal began quietly. Emily talked about school. Jack discussed basketball. Melissa barely spoke. Ethan drank 2 glasses of wine. After dinner, the children went upstairs. The adults remained at the table. The Christmas tree glowed in the corner. Outside, snow covered the yard. Then Ethan spoke. "We need to settle this." I felt my heart sink. "Not tonight." "Tonight." Melissa nodded. "We've waited long enough." I looked at my son. Waited for what? For you to be reasonable. The words struck me. Reasonable. Because refusing to give away my home had apparently become unreasonable. I folded my hands. "I'm not transferring the house." Ethan leaned forward. "Why?" "Because it's my home. It'll be mine, eventually." "Eventually isn't today." His face hardened. "You don't trust me." "I don't trust what you're asking." Melissa suddenly spoke. "You're making everyone suffer." "What everyone?" "Our family." I looked around the room. Robert's photographs. The Christmas ornaments. The dining table. The walls we had painted together. My entire life surrounded me. Then Ethan stood. His chair slid backward across the floor. His voice rose. "This house is mine now." For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I looked at him. "What did you say?" His eyes burned with frustration. "I said this house is mine now." Melissa didn't stop him. She stood beside him. "We've spent years helping you." Ethan pointed toward the back of the property. "The room behind the garage is heated." I stared at him. "What?" "You don't need the master bedroom." I felt cold, truly cold, as if the temperature inside the room had disappeared. Emily had come downstairs. Jack stood beside her. Both children looked terrified. "Dad," Emily whispered. But Ethan continued. "The house makes more sense for us." Us. Not me. Not his mother. His family. His future. His plans. And then came the moment that changed everything. I looked around the dining room, at my husband's chair, at the Christmas lights, at my grandchildren, at my son. And I realized that if I argued, he would only become louder. If I cried, he would think he had won. If I begged, I would lose myself. So I did something nobody expected. I said nothing. No tears. No screaming. No defense. I simply stood, picked up my coffee cup, and walked into the kitchen. The silence behind me became unbearable. Ethan finally spoke. "Mom." I didn't answer. Melissa looked confused. Emily began crying softly. Jack lowered his head. I washed my cup, dried my hands, and stared out the kitchen window. Because earlier that morning, before any of this happened, my telephone had rung, and Grace Whitmore had said, "Kylie, the documents are ready!" I had not told Ethan. I had not told Melissa. I had not even told Daniel. As I stood there in the kitchen listening to my son breathe heavily behind me, I finally understood something. He believed my silence meant surrender. He believed he had won. But my husband had spent years preparing for this moment, and somewhere beyond the snow-covered streets of Ohio, answers were waiting. So when Ethan finally said one more time, "This house belongs to us now," I simply looked at him and remained quiet, because sometimes silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the moment before the truth arrives. The morning after Ethan told me the house belonged to him, I woke before sunrise. For several minutes, I simply lay in bed listening to the silence. No Robert breathing beside me. No sounds from the kitchen. Only the old furnace humming somewhere below the floorboards. Outside, snow covered the yard. The maple tree stood bare against the gray Ohio sky. Christmas lights from neighboring houses still glowed faintly in the darkness. My son had told me to move into the room behind the garage, and somehow the words hurt even more in daylight. I slowly sat up. For years after Robert died, I had wondered what true loneliness felt like. Now I knew. It was not living alone. It was sitting in your own home while someone you loved decided you no longer belonged there. The telephone rang at exactly 8:30. I stared at it before answering. "Hello." "Kylie." Grace Whitmore's voice was calm. "Yes?" "Are you all right?" The question nearly made me cry. "I don't know." She was quiet for a moment. "Did something happen?" I looked toward Robert's photograph on my dresser. "Yes." "What happened?" I took a deep breath. "My son told me the house belongs to him." Silence. Then Grace said quietly, "Then it's time." Those were the same words she had spoken weeks earlier, only now they carried an entirely different meaning. "What do you mean?" "I think we should meet today." "At your office?" "No." She paused. "Bring Robert's letter. Bring every document you found. There are some things you need to understand." I agreed. After hanging up, I walked downstairs. The dining room still looked exactly as it had the previous evening. Coffee cups, napkins, a chair slightly pushed back. Evidence that my family had been there. Evidence that my family had changed. I cleaned the table slowly. I washed dishes. I folded blankets. Part of me wondered whether Ethan would call to apologize. He didn't. Melissa didn't call either. At 10 o'clock, Emily sent me a text. "Grandma, are you okay?" I stared at the message. After several seconds, I replied, "Yes, sweetheart. I love you." Her answer came immediately. "I love you too." I nearly cried, because children often understand what adults refuse to see. At noon, I drove to meet Grace. She had asked me to come to a small cafe near downtown. When I arrived, she was already sitting near the window. A leather folder rested beside her. She stood and hugged me. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep." "I expected that." We ordered coffee. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I placed Robert's letter on the table. Grace carefully touched the paper. "He wrote this nearly 12 years ago." My heart skipped. 12 years. She nodded. "Robert was very thorough." I looked at her. Why did he do this? Grace folded her hands. Because he worried. About Ethan? She hesitated. Not exactly. Then what? She looked out the window before answering. Your husband believed that grief makes people vulnerable. I said nothing. He worried that after his death you would trust people too easily. I felt tears gathering. He knew me. Grace smiled gently. Yes. She opened the leather folder. Inside were copies of documents, legal papers, signatures, official seals. One document contained both Robert's name and mine. Another carried Grace's notarization. Finally, she removed a sealed envelope. This was left in my care. I stared at it. For me, for you. When, the same day Robert signed everything, my hands trembled. What is it? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked, Kylie, has Ethan tried to pressure you repeatedly? Yes. Has he asked for ownership? Yes. Has he attempted to control finances or paperwork? I nodded. Grace sighed softly. Then Robert's concerns were justified. I felt physically cold. My husband thought our son might do this. Not specifically, she chose her words carefully, but he believed that money changes people. I remembered Robert saying something similar years earlier. When money enters the room, character follows. At the time, he had been talking about business partners. Perhaps he had been thinking about more than that. Grace finally opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Robert's handwriting. Again. My sweet Kylie. If Grace is showing you this, then something has gone wrong. Please understand that none of this was created because I stopped trusting our children. It was created because I never wanted you to stand alone. If anyone ever attempts to pressure you regarding our home, remember this: you owe nobody your peace. You owe nobody your security. You owe nobody the house we built together, not even family. I covered my mouth. Tears rolled down my face. For several moments, I couldn't speak. Grace handed me a tissue. He loved you very much. I nodded. I know. She then placed another document in front of me. This is what matters. I looked down. It was a trust agreement. Robert's signature. My signature. Grace's seal. I frowned. I don't remember signing this. You did. When? After Robert's surgery 12 years ago. Slowly, memory returned. Robert had undergone a heart procedure. The doctors expected a full recovery. During that time, we met with an attorney. I remembered signing papers, but I never understood their purpose. Grace pointed to a section. The property cannot be transferred, assigned, or modified without your voluntary consent. I read the sentence twice, then 3 times. Another section caught my attention. Any evidence of coercion, manipulation, or undue influence shall immediately invalidate any attempted transfer. I looked up. What does this mean? It means Robert wanted you protected. From my own family. From anyone. I leaned back in my chair. For weeks I had felt helpless. Old. Alone. Now, for the first time, I felt something else. Anger. Not at Robert, not even at Ethan, but at myself. Because I had allowed guilt to silence me. Grace spoke gently. Kylie, there is something else. I looked up. What? There are instructions. My heartbeat quickened. What instructions? She opened another folder. Robert requested that I intervene if a dispute ever occurred. I stared at her. You mean legally? Yes. And now, she met my eyes. Now I believe that day has come. Outside, snow began falling again. People walked past the cafe carrying shopping bags and Christmas packages. Normal lives. Normal families. Meanwhile, my own world had quietly changed. As we prepared to leave, Grace touched my arm. One more thing. What? If Ethan tries again, do not argue. I frowned. Why? Because people reveal themselves when they believe they've already won. I thought about the previous night. His voice, his anger, his certainty. This house is mine now. Perhaps he already believed victory was inevitable. Perhaps that confidence would become his mistake. As I drove home, Robert's words repeated inside my mind. You owe nobody your peace, not even family. For the first time in months, I no longer felt afraid. Because somewhere ahead, hidden inside documents and promises made years earlier, my husband had left me one final gift. Not money, not property, not legal papers. He had left me a way to stand on my own feet. And very soon, my son was going to discover that his father had prepared for this day long before any of us realized it would come. 3 days before Christmas, Ethan called and asked the entire family to come to my house on Saturday afternoon. He described it as a family meeting, nothing more, nothing less. I already knew it would not be either. By then, snow had covered most of our neighborhood. The Christmas lights outside looked beautiful at night, but inside my house, the holiday spirit had disappeared. The tree still stood beside the living room window. Robert's old ornaments still hung from the branches. But I had stopped playing Christmas music. I had stopped baking cookies. I had stopped planning. Because something much larger was approaching. The morning after my meeting with Grace, she had asked me a simple question. Would you like me to attend if your family pressures you again? At the time, I had hesitated. Now I knew my answer. Yes. On Thursday evening, Daniel arrived from North Carolina. The moment I opened the front door and saw him standing there, I finally allowed myself to cry. He wrapped his arms around me. I'm here, Mom. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. He looked older than when I had last seen him. A few gray hairs had appeared near his temples, but his eyes still carried the same kindness he had as a little boy. After dinner, we sat in Robert's workshop. The old heater rattled softly. I handed Daniel the letters, Robert's words, the trust documents, Grace's notes. He read them quietly. When he finished, he looked up. Dad knew. I nodded. I think he did. Daniel stared at his father's empty chair. He never told me. He never told me either. He folded the papers carefully. Do you want me there Saturday? Yes. Good. He looked directly at me. Because I don't think Ethan is going to stop. Neither did I. Friday morning, Grace called. How are you feeling? Nervous. That's normal. What happens tomorrow? That depends. On what? She paused. On how much Ethan believes he already owns the house. The sentence stayed with me all day. Saturday arrived cold and gray. By noon, I had cleaned the kitchen, prepared coffee, set out cookies, the same things I had done for every family gathering for decades. But this time felt different. This wasn't Christmas. This wasn't family. This was something else. Daniel sat beside me in the living room. You don't owe anyone an explanation. I know. You don't have to defend yourself. I nodded, but mothers spend their entire lives defending themselves. At exactly 1 o'clock, Ethan arrived. Melissa stepped out of the passenger seat. Emily and Jack followed. Ethan barely looked at Daniel. Daniel nodded politely. Hey. Hey. Melissa kissed my cheek. Her smile looked exhausted. The children hugged me. Emily held on a little longer than usual. She whispered, Grandma, are you okay? I squeezed her hand. I'm okay. For a while, nobody spoke about the house. Coffee was poured. Small talk filled the room. Weather, school, Christmas shopping, football, everything except the truth. Then Ethan cleared his throat. I think we should discuss things. Daniel leaned back in his chair. What things? Ethan looked directly at me. The future. My stomach tightened. Melissa opened a folder. I immediately recognized it. Documents. Again. Always documents. I thought we agreed to stop discussing this, I said. We can't. Why not? Ethan folded his hands. Because this situation isn't working. Daniel spoke for the first time. What situation? Ethan looked irritated. Mom living here alone. I stared at him. I've lived here alone for 5 years. Exactly. Daniel frowned. And Melissa finally spoke. It's becoming difficult. For who? Daniel asked. Neither of them answered. The silence lasted several seconds. Then Ethan said something that surprised everyone. I've already spoken with a realtor. I felt cold. A realtor. Just to understand options. This isn't your house. It's our family house. Daniel leaned forward. No, it's Mom's house. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're never here. That doesn't matter. Melissa sighed heavily. We're trying to protect Kylie. Daniel looked at her. By taking ownership, no one is taking anything. I finally spoke. Then why are we here? Ethan stood, because apparently he could no longer sit still. We're here because nobody wants to admit reality. What reality? You're getting older. Again. Older. As though age itself had become a crime. He continued. You can't maintain this house forever. Then I'll hire help. You don't understand. No, Ethan. I looked directly at my son. I understand perfectly. The room became quiet. Even the children had stopped moving. Emily sat frozen beside the Christmas tree. Jack stared at the floor. Melissa's hands trembled slightly. Then Ethan said the words that would eventually destroy everything. I've sacrificed years helping you. My heart broke. Because suddenly I understood. Every grocery trip, every repair, every favor. He had been keeping score. I spoke softly. I never asked you to. His face turned red. You needed me. I needed my son. Silence. Not a single person moved. Then the doorbell rang. Everyone looked toward the hallway. Ethan frowned. Are you expecting someone? I stood slowly. Yes. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it. I walked toward the front door. When I opened it, Grace Whitmore stood outside, wearing a dark winter coat. Snow rested lightly on her shoulders. Beside her stood attorney Susan Blake. Ethan appeared behind me. His face immediately changed. Who are they? I stepped aside. Please come in. Grace entered. She removed her gloves. Susan carried a leather briefcase. Nobody spoke. Melissa looked confused. Daniel stood. Ethan's expression darkened. What is this? Grace looked at him calmly. My name is Grace Whitmore. Ethan didn't answer. She continued. I worked with your father. The room suddenly felt smaller. Even the Christmas lights seemed dimmer. Susan Blake placed her briefcase on the dining table. Daniel slowly sat back down. Emily looked toward me. I gave her a small smile. Because for the first time in months, I was no longer alone. Ethan looked directly at me. What is happening? I finally answered. My husband prepared for this day. The silence that followed felt enormous. Outside, snow began falling again. Inside my house, Robert's photograph stood above the fireplace, watching, waiting. And for the first time since he died, I felt as though he had just walked back into the room. For several seconds after I said, my husband prepared for this day, nobody spoke. The only sound inside the room came from the Christmas tree lights softly humming beside the fireplace. Snow continued falling outside. Ethan stared at Grace. Melissa looked confused. Daniel sat perfectly still. Emily held Jack's hand. And above the fireplace, Robert's photograph watched over all of us. Grace removed her coat and carefully placed it on a chair. Attorney Susan Blake opened her briefcase. Ethan finally found his voice. What exactly is this? Grace looked directly at him. Your father asked me to help your mother if certain circumstances ever occurred. Melissa frowned. What circumstances? Grace answered calmly. Pressure regarding the family home. The room instantly became cold. Ethan crossed his arms. Nobody is pressuring anyone. For the first time all afternoon, Daniel spoke. Really? Ethan ignored him. Grace sat at the dining table. Susan Blake removed several folders. I recognized them immediately. Robert's trust. The letters. The documents I had seen in Grace's office. My hands trembled. Not from fear. From relief. Because I was no longer standing alone. Ethan looked at me. You brought lawyers into this, I answered quietly. No. I looked toward Grace. Your father did. Melissa shook her head. This is ridiculous. Grace folded her hands. Perhaps, but Robert Morgan was a very careful man. Daniel gave a small smile. That sounds like Dad. For a brief moment, the tension eased. Then Susan Blake spoke. Mrs. Morgan asked me to review the documents created by Robert Morgan and notarized by Grace Whitmore. Ethan's face tightened. What documents? Grace opened a folder. She removed several pages. The Morgan Family Trust. Silence. I watched my son's expression change. He had never heard those words before. Neither had I until recently. Melissa looked at Ethan. You knew about this? No, Grace continued. The trust was established 12 years ago. Daniel frowned. 12 years? She nodded. Robert wanted additional protections for Kylie. Ethan laughed softly. Protections from what? Nobody answered immediately. Grace looked directly at him. From undue influence. The words landed heavily. Melissa crossed her arms. Are you accusing us of something? No. Grace remained calm. I'm explaining why these documents exist. Susan Blake opened another file. Under the terms of the trust, the property remains under Mrs. Morgan's exclusive control during her lifetime. Ethan leaned forward. What does that mean? It means she decides everything. His face reddened. But I'm her son. Susan nodded. Yes. And eventually the house comes to the family. She carefully chose her words. Only according to Mrs. Morgan's wishes. Melissa spoke. So Ethan has no rights. Susan looked at her. Not ownership rights. The room became very quiet. I looked at Ethan. For the first time since Robert died, my son appeared genuinely uncertain. His confidence began to disappear. He looked at the documents, at Grace, at me. Then he said something that surprised me. "Dad never told me," Grace answered softly. He hoped he would never need to. Susan placed another document on the table. "There is something else." Everyone looked toward her. She adjusted her glasses. "The trust specifically addresses coercion." Ethan frowned. "What coercion?" She read directly from the document. "Any attempt to pressure, manipulate, intimidate, or influence Mrs. Morgan regarding the transfer of the property shall invalidate any future claims based upon such actions." The words seemed to echo through the room. Emily looked confused. Jack lowered his head. Melissa's face had become pale. Ethan stared at me. "What does that mean?" I answered quietly. "It means your father wanted me protected." He shook his head. "From me." My eyes filled with tears. "No, Ethan." I swallowed. "From anyone." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Grace reached into her folder. "There is one final instruction." My heart began to race. I had not seen this document before. Neither had Daniel. Grace looked at me. "Robert asked me to read this only if family conflict occurred." I nodded slowly. She unfolded the paper. It was written entirely in Robert's handwriting. Grace began reading. "If this letter is being read, then the family I love is experiencing pain. To my sons, your mother stood beside me when we had nothing. She sacrificed vacations, dreams, and comfort, so you could have opportunities we never had. The house does not belong to you. It does not belong to me. It belongs first to the woman who helped build it. When she no longer needs it, only then should decisions be made. Until that day, respect her, protect her, listen to her, and if you fail to do those things, you fail me as well." By the time Grace finished reading, nobody could speak. Daniel wiped his eyes. Emily was crying. Even Jack looked overwhelmed. I stared at Robert's photograph. For years after his death, I had felt abandoned. Yet somehow, he had still found a way to stand beside me. Ethan finally spoke. His voice sounded smaller. "He thought I would do this," Grace answered gently. "No." "Then why write it?" "Because Robert understood people." Melissa suddenly stood. "This is unbelievable." She looked at me. "You've been planning this." I stared at her. "No. You brought witnesses. You brought lawyers. You embarrassed us." Daniel finally stood. "No." His voice was calm. "You embarrassed yourselves." Ethan turned toward his brother. "Stay out of this." Daniel shook his head. "I stayed out of it for too long." Silence. He looked directly at Ethan. "She's our mother." Ethan looked away. Susan Blake closed her folder. "There is one additional matter." Everyone turned toward her. She spoke carefully. "Repeated attempts to obtain ownership from an elderly person can sometimes create legal concerns." Melissa stiffened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Mrs. Morgan has the right to feel safe and free from pressure." Ethan suddenly looked frightened. "No one threatened her." Nobody answered, because he had. Perhaps not with violence, but with words, with pressure, with guilt, with fear. "Move into the garage. This house is mine now." The memories returned all at once. I slowly stood. My knees shook, but my voice did not. I need to say something. Everyone looked at me. I looked at my son, the little boy who once jumped into freezing water to save his brother, the teenager who carried groceries for me, the man sitting in my dining room. You asked me why I didn't trust you. My voice trembled. The truth is that I wanted to. Tears filled his eyes. But every time you talked about the house, you stopped talking about me. Nobody moved. You asked about paperwork. I looked at Melissa. You asked about insurance. I looked back at Ethan. You asked about property. My voice broke. But nobody asked if I was lonely. Emily began crying again. I continued. Nobody asked if I missed your father. Silence. Nobody asked if I was afraid. My son lowered his eyes, and for the first time since all of this began, I saw something in his face that had been missing for months. Shame. Outside, the snow continued falling. Inside, Robert's words still seemed to linger in the air. Respect her, protect her, listen to her. The room had changed. The balance had changed. And for the first time in many months, my son understood something he had never expected. The house had never been his, and neither had the right to decide my future. Nobody left immediately after Robert's letter was read. In some ways, that surprised me. For months, I had imagined this moment differently. I thought there would be shouting, door slamming, angry accusations. Instead, silence filled the room. The Christmas tree lights reflected against the windows. Snow continued falling outside. Robert's photograph stood above the fireplace, watching all of us. Ethan remained standing. Melissa sat with her arms folded tightly against her chest. Daniel stayed beside me. Grace and Susan quietly gathered some of the documents. Emily wiped tears from her eyes. Jack stared at the floor. It felt less like a family argument and more like a funeral. Except this time, we were mourning something different. Trust. Finally, Ethan spoke. So Dad planned all of this. Grace answered carefully. No. He expected this. No. Then why? She looked directly at him. Because your father understood that people change under pressure. Ethan laughed bitterly. You all think I'm some kind of criminal. No one said that, Susan replied. But everyone seems to think I was trying to steal the house. I looked at my son. The anger was still there. But now something else had appeared. Fear. Because certainty had disappeared. For months, he had believed the future was already decided. Now he realized it wasn't. Melissa suddenly stood. This is humiliating. Daniel looked at her. What part? The accusations. I finally spoke. There haven't been accusations. She turned toward me. Really? Lawyers. Documents, trusts. I took a slow breath. Robert arranged those things. But you're using them. No. My voice remained calm. I'm protecting myself. The room became quiet again. Then Emily spoke. Nobody expected it. She was 16 now, old enough to understand far more than adults sometimes realize. Dad! Everyone turned toward her. Her voice trembled. Did you really tell Grandma to move into the garage? Ethan froze. Nobody moved. Emily looked ready to cry. I heard you. Jack lowered his head. Melissa looked uncomfortable. For several seconds, Ethan couldn't answer. Finally, he said, I was upset. Emily shook her head. Grandma cried. I looked down because I hadn't wanted my grandchildren to carry those memories. But children always see more than we believe. Jack finally spoke. Dad, it's Grandma's house. The room suddenly felt smaller, not because of lawyers, not because of documents, because children had spoken the truth. Ethan sat down heavily. For the first time all afternoon, he looked exhausted. Susan Blake quietly closed her briefcase. I believe my work here is finished. Grace nodded. But before leaving, Grace looked at Ethan. Your father loved you very much. He looked up. I know. He never wanted this family divided. Nobody spoke. She continued. But he loved Kylie too. I felt tears return. Robert worried about what loneliness does to people. Ethan lowered his eyes. I wasn't trying to hurt Mom. My heart broke hearing those words. Because I believed him. At least, part of me did. I didn't believe he had sat down one morning and decided to take my house. I believed something much sadder. He had slowly convinced himself that he deserved it, that helping me created ownership, that sacrifice earned control, that being my son gave him rights. And perhaps Melissa had helped those ideas grow. After Grace and Susan left, nobody immediately moved. The house felt strangely empty without them. The protection Robert had arranged had done its job. Now only family remained. Daniel finally stood. I'm going to make coffee. Emily followed him into the kitchen. Jack went upstairs. That left me, Ethan, and Melissa alone. The three people standing in the center of the storm. Ethan looked at me. I never wanted this, I answered honestly. I don't think you did. Melissa spoke quietly. We've struggled financially. This was the first time she had said it openly. No business plans, no future investments, no careful explanations, just the truth. Our company lost money. Ethan looked embarrassed. We took loans. Melissa continued. We thought if we could use the house as collateral. Our house? I asked. She nodded slowly. Yes. The honesty felt painful. Because now everything made sense. The questions, the pressure, the documents, the lawyer, the urgency. I looked at my son. Why didn't you tell me? He rubbed his eyes. Because I was ashamed. Those words finally sounded genuine. Daniel returned carrying coffee. Nobody touched it. Ethan looked at his younger brother. You think I'm terrible? Daniel sat down. No. Then what? He thought for a moment. I think you forgot who Mom is. Silence, because it was true. For months, they had discussed me as a problem. An elderly woman, a house owner, an obstacle. Not their mother, not Robert's widow, not Kylie. Christmas Eve arrived 2 days later. Nobody knew what to expect. Part of me considered canceling dinner entirely. But Robert had loved Christmas. And somehow, canceling felt like surrender. So I cooked. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie. The same meal we had shared for decades. This time, however, something had changed. Ethan arrived quietly. Melissa seemed nervous. Emily hugged me tightly. Jack helped carry dishes. Daniel stood beside me in the kitchen. The evening felt fragile, like glass. At dinner, Robert's chair remained empty, as always. We held hands for prayer. My voice trembled. Lord, thank you for family. Thank you for forgiveness. Thank you for the people we love, even when we fail one another. When I finished, nobody moved. Then Ethan spoke. Mom. I looked up. He swallowed. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air. No excuses, no explanations, only those two words. Melissa looked down. I am too. My eyes filled with tears. Because for months I had imagined revenge, victory, justice. But sitting there beside the Christmas tree, none of those things mattered. I simply wanted my son back. Ethan continued. I don't know when things changed. Neither did I. Maybe after Robert died. Maybe when money became tight. Maybe when fear entered their lives. Sometimes people don't change all at once. Sometimes they drift. Slowly, quietly. Until one day they no longer recognize themselves. After dinner, Emily placed a small gift in my hands. I opened it. Inside was a framed photograph. The entire family, taken 3 years earlier. Robert's picture stood beside us. Emily had added it digitally. At the bottom, she had written, Home is people, not houses. I began crying immediately, and for the first time in many months, Ethan cried too. But even as healing began, one question still remained. The future. Because apologies heal hearts. But they do not automatically repair trust. And soon, I would have to make the most important decision of my life. Not about the house, but about my family. The week after Christmas felt strangely quiet. For the first time in months, nobody mentioned the house. No documents appeared on my kitchen table. No conversations about ownership. No discussions about the future. Yet beneath the silence, something still remained unfinished. Apologies had been spoken. Tears had been shed. But trust, once broken, does not return simply because people wish it to. On the morning after Christmas, I found Ethan sitting alone on my back porch. Snow covered the yard. The old maple tree stood bare against the gray Ohio sky. He held a cup of coffee in both hands. For a moment, he looked exactly like Robert, only older, more tired. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. He stared into the backyard. I keep hearing Dad's letter. So did I. Protect her, respect her, listen to her. The words had become impossible to ignore. Ethan swallowed. I don't know when everything changed. I answered honestly. Neither do I. He nodded slowly. I thought I was helping. I looked at him. No. He closed his eyes. I know. For several minutes, only the wind moved through the trees. Then he said the words I had been waiting to hear. I'm ashamed. My throat tightened. Because shame is painful. But it is also honest. And honesty was something we had not shared for a very long time. That afternoon, Daniel sat with me in the kitchen. He stirred his coffee. What are you going to do? I knew exactly what he meant. Not the house. Ethan. I don't know. Mom! He hesitated. You can't pretend this never happened. I know. You also can't spend the rest of your life being afraid. He was right. The house had become larger than walls and furniture. It had become boundaries, respect, dignity, the ability to say no. 3 days later, I asked Ethan and Melissa to come over. Alone, no children, no lawyers, no Grace, no Daniel, just us. When they arrived, both looked nervous. I invited them into the living room. Robert's photograph stood beside the fireplace, as always. I sat across from them. For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, I took a deep breath. There are some things I need to say. Ethan nodded. Melissa looked down. I love you both. My voice trembled. That hasn't changed. Tears appeared in Ethan's eyes. But what happened cannot happen again. Neither spoke. I continued. The house belongs to me. Yes, Ethan said quietly. I make decisions here. Yes. My finances are private. Melissa nodded. I understand. You do not have access to my accounts. Okay. You do not make decisions about my future. Silence. Because boundaries often sound harsh to people who are used to crossing them. I looked directly at Ethan. I need my keys. He looked surprised. The spare key. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he reached into his pocket. The small brass key rested in his hand. He stared at it. Years ago, I had given him that key because I trusted him completely. Now he slowly placed it on the table. The sound it made felt much louder than it should have. Something inside me broke and healed at the same time. Melissa finally spoke. We never wanted to lose you. I looked at her. Then why did you try to take my home? Her eyes filled with tears. We were drowning. It was the first time she had spoken honestly. No business plans, no investments, no careful explanations, only fear. Our debt kept growing. Ethan lowered his head. I thought if we could secure the house, everything would improve. I nodded. But you forgot that I was still living here. He began crying. Not dramatically, not loudly, simply quietly, like a little boy who suddenly understands what he has broken. I'm sorry. I believed him. That was the difficult part, because forgiveness becomes harder when the apology is sincere. If he had remained cruel, my decision would have been easy. But this was my son, the same boy who once climbed into my bed during thunderstorms. The same boy who cried at Robert's funeral. The same boy who had somehow lost himself. I looked at him. I'm willing to forgive you. He looked up immediately. But things have to change. He nodded quickly. Anything. I shook my head. Not anything. I pointed toward the front door. You need to leave this house. Silence. Melissa looked shocked. What? You need your own home. Ethan stared at me. Mom. No. My voice remained calm. This house is no longer part of your financial plans. He swallowed. We'll lose money. I know. We may have to sell our business. I know. His eyes filled again. You'd really do that? For the first time in months, I answered without guilt. Yes. Because protecting myself was not cruelty, it was survival. Melissa wiped tears from her face. We don't have many options. I nodded. But you still have choices. There is a difference. After they left, Daniel sat beside me. He had heard most of the conversation from the kitchen. You did the right thing. I stared at Robert's chair. It doesn't feel right. No. He smiled sadly. That's because your mom. That evening I walked through the house. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Every room felt slightly different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I had finally spoken. For months, I had remained quiet because I feared losing my son. Instead, my silence had nearly caused me to lose myself. A few days later, Ethan called. I found an apartment. My chest tightened. Okay. It's temporary. All right. There was a pause. I wish Dad were here. I looked at Robert's photograph. So do I. I think he'd be disappointed. I answered honestly. He'd also want you to learn. Silence. Then Ethan whispered, I don't know if you'll ever trust me again. I looked out at the falling snow. Trust. Such a small word. Such a fragile thing. Finally, I answered. I don't know either. After we hung up, I sat alone beside the Christmas tree. The lights still glowed softly. Soon, I would take the decorations down. Another year would begin. And for the first time since Robert died, I understood something. My husband had not spent years preparing legal documents to save the house. He had prepared them to save me. Because houses can be rebuilt, money can return, relationships can heal. But once a person loses their voice, it can take years to find it again. And after months of fear, guilt, and silence, I had finally found mine. January arrived quietly. The Christmas decorations came down. The lights disappeared from the neighborhood. The snow remained. For years, January had always been Robert's least favorite month. He used to say that January felt like a long hallway after the music had ended. For the first time since his death, I finally understood what he meant. The house felt different now. Not empty. Different. The tension that had filled every room for months had disappeared. The kitchen no longer felt like a battlefield. The dining room no longer reminded me of arguments. For the first time in years, the house belonged entirely to me again. And yet, something inside me still felt uncertain. One morning, I stood in the kitchen looking at the old wallpaper Robert and I had installed nearly 20 years earlier. The corners had begun to peel. The paint had faded. I suddenly heard his voice. Kylie, one day we should redo this kitchen. We never had. There was always something more important. The boys' college tuition, car repairs, medical bills, life. I called Linda. What are you doing today? Nothing important. Want to help me repaint my kitchen? She laughed. Who are you, and what have you done with Kylie Morgan? For the first time in months, I laughed too. Over the next several weeks, something unexpected happened. I began living again. Linda helped me choose a soft cream color for the walls. Daniel spent a weekend replacing cabinet handles. Emily came over and helped organize old family photographs. Even Jack helped carry boxes into the garage. The house slowly changed, not because it needed to, because I did. One afternoon, while sorting through old photographs, Emily sat beside me. She picked up a picture of Robert. He looks kind, I smiled. He was. She hesitated. Grandpa would have protected you. I looked at her. He did? She nodded. I think he still is. The words nearly made me cry, because perhaps she was right. At church one Sunday, several women invited me to join a weekly book club. Normally, I would have politely declined. Robert had always been my closest friend. After his death, I had slowly withdrawn from people. Widowhood teaches isolation if you allow it. This time, I said yes. The following Thursday, I sat with 6 women drinking coffee and discussing novels. For 2 hours, nobody mentioned age. Nobody asked about property. Nobody treated me as fragile. I simply became Kylie again. Not mom. Not widow. Not homeowner. Just Kylie. Daniel called every Sunday evening. "How's the kitchen?" "Almost finished." "How's the book club?" "Wonderful." "How are you?" I smiled. "I think I'm getting better." There was a long pause. Then he said quietly, "Dad would be happy." I looked toward Robert's chair. I hope so. Meanwhile, Ethan rarely called. At first, the silence hurt. Then I realized something. Healing requires space, and perhaps my son needed space as much as I did. Emily continued visiting. Sometimes she came alone, sometimes with Jack. They baked cookies, watched old movies, listened to stories about Robert. One afternoon, Emily asked, "Grandma, are you angry at Dad?" The question surprised me. I thought carefully. "No. Really? I'm hurt." She nodded. "That's different." "Yes." She looked down at her hands. "Dad cries sometimes now." My chest tightened. "Does he?" She nodded. "He says he disappointed Grandpa." For several moments, I couldn't speak, because perhaps that pain would teach him something no lecture ever could. February arrived with more snow. One evening, I sat beside the fireplace reading when I heard a knock at the door. No one ever knocked. Friends called first. Daniel had a key. I opened the door. A delivery driver handed me a small envelope. No return address, only my name. Kylie Morgan. My heart suddenly raced. The handwriting looked familiar. I carried the envelope into the kitchen. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. Then I opened it. Inside was a letter. Ethan's handwriting. "Mom, I've written this letter 5 times. Every version sounded wrong. Some made excuses, some blamed money, some blamed stress. The truth is simpler. I became afraid. I was afraid of losing the business, afraid of disappointing Melissa, afraid of failing. And somehow, I convinced myself that your house could save me. I stopped seeing it as your home. I stopped seeing you as my mother. And that is the part I regret most. I miss Dad every day, and I think he would be ashamed of me. I understand if you never trust me again, but I hope someday you can forgive me. I love you. Ethan." I read the letter 3 times, then 4. No requests, no explanations, no manipulation, only honesty. For a long time, I sat quietly. Outside, snow fell softly across the backyard Robert loved. I looked toward his photograph. You always believed people could change. The following morning, I called Daniel. He wrote to me. What did he say? He apologized. There was silence. What do you think? I looked out the kitchen window. The new paint looked beautiful in the morning light. The house felt warm, alive, safe. I think he's finally telling the truth. That evening, I placed Ethan's letter inside Robert's wooden chest, beside the trust, beside the old documents, beside the letters that had saved me. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because healing had begun. As I turned off the lights that night, I realized something. The greatest gift Robert had left me wasn't the trust. It wasn't the legal protection. It wasn't the house. It was the courage to believe that I still had a life after grief, after betrayal, after fear, and somewhere beyond the winter snow, spring was slowly beginning to arrive. Spring arrived slowly. The snow finally disappeared from the backyard. The maple tree outside my kitchen window began showing small green leaves. For the first time in years, I opened every window in the house. Fresh air moved through the rooms Robert and I had built together. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home. Again. One Saturday morning, nearly 3 months after Christmas, Daniel helped me plant flowers near the front porch. Emily carried bags of soil. Jack watered the flower beds. The sun felt warm. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then I saw Ethan's truck pull into the driveway. Nobody spoke. Emily looked at me. I smiled. "It's okay." Ethan stepped out alone. No Melissa, no folders, no documents, no expectations. Only my son. He walked toward us slowly. His hands remained in his pockets. He looked thinner, older, as if the past few months had aged him. "Hi, Mom." "Hello?" He looked at Daniel. "Hey." Daniel nodded. "Hey." An uncomfortable silence followed. Then Ethan held out a small wooden box. "I found this while cleaning the apartment." I looked down. The box belonged to Robert. My heart tightened. Inside were old fishing lures, photographs, and a pocket watch Robert had owned for years. Ethan swallowed. "Dad wanted Daniel and me to have it someday." I opened the watch. The hands had stopped 10 years earlier. The day Robert underwent heart surgery. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Ethan quietly said, "I've been seeing a counselor." I looked up. "A counselor?" He nodded. "I needed help." Daniel looked surprised. "So did I." Ethan sat on the porch steps. "The business failed." My heart sank. "I heard." "We had to close it." No one answered, because sometimes consequences speak louder than judgment. He continued, "We sold almost everything." I sat beside him. "What about the house you rented?" "We moved to a smaller apartment." His voice carried no bitterness, only exhaustion. "I spent months blaming everyone." He looked at me. "Melissa, Daniel, the economy, even Dad." He swallowed hard. "But the truth is simpler." "What truth?" I was afraid. Those same words again. And this time, I believed them completely. Fear had entered his life. Fear of failure. Fear of disappointing his family. Fear of losing everything. And fear had slowly transformed into entitlement. He looked toward Robert's chair, visible through the living room window. "I think I wanted Dad to save me." I nodded. "But he couldn't." "No." His eyes filled with tears. "So I tried to make you save me." The honesty hurt, but it also healed. Because finally, there were no more excuses, no manipulation, no hidden motives, only truth. That afternoon, we shared lunch together. Not because everything had been repaired, because everyone was trying. Emily laughed for the first time in months. Jack showed Daniel his baseball photographs. Even Ethan smiled. The house felt different, not perfect, but possible. Several weeks later, Grace Whitmore invited me to lunch. She looked healthier than I remembered, perhaps because her work had finally ended. "How are things?" she asked. "Better." She smiled. "And Ethan?" "He apologized." "Do you forgive him?" I thought carefully. "Yes." "And do you trust him?" The answer took longer. "Not completely." Grace nodded. "That's honest." I stirred my tea. I used to think forgiveness meant everything returned to normal. And now I think forgiveness means giving people the opportunity to become better. She smiled. Robert would agree. As spring turned towards summer, life slowly continued. The book club became part of my routine. I joined the church volunteer committee. Linda and I took short weekend trips. Daniel visited often. Emily called every Sunday. Jack sent photographs from baseball games. And Ethan? He rebuilt his life. Slowly, patiently. He found a new job with a construction company. Melissa returned to teaching. Their apartment remained small, but perhaps small was exactly what they needed. One evening in June, Ethan asked if he could come over. I made coffee. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where so many painful conversations had taken place. He looked around. You painted? I smiled. Yes. It looks good. We sat quietly. Then he asked, Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you fight me? I looked out the window. The garden flowers had begun to bloom. I did fight you. He shook his head. No. You stayed quiet. I smiled sadly. Because your father taught me something. What? Sometimes people hear themselves more clearly when nobody interrupts them. He lowered his eyes. I sounded terrible. Yes. He nodded. I did. For several moments, we simply sat together. Then I reached for Robert's pocket watch. I had repaired it several weeks earlier. The hands moved again, ticking softly. I placed it into Ethan's hand. His eyes widened. Mom, it belonged to your father. Tears immediately filled his eyes. I don't deserve it. Maybe not. He looked up. Then why? I smiled. Because your father believed people could learn. He began crying, not because of the watch, because of forgiveness. Months later, the entire family gathered for Thanksgiving. The same dining room, the same table, the same recipes. Robert's chair remained empty, as always. No one sat there. No one ever would. Before dinner, Ethan stood. His hands trembled. He looked at everyone, especially me. I need to say something. The room became quiet. A year ago, I thought this house belonged to me. Tears filled his eyes. But I was wrong. He looked directly at me. This house belongs to the woman who built our family. Emily cried. Jack looked down. Melissa held Ethan's hand, and for the first time in a very long time, I saw my son clearly again. Not the frightened man who wanted control. Not the angry man who demanded ownership. Simply, my son. When dinner ended, everyone helped clean the kitchen. The grandchildren laughed. Daniel washed dishes. Melissa dried them. Ethan stood beside me. He looked around the house. You staying here forever? I smiled. Probably. He laughed softly. Good. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in the living room. The house was quiet. Robert's photograph rested above the fireplace. I touched the frame. You saved me. The clock ticked softly. Outside, autumn leaves moved across the yard. Inside, peace finally returned. My son once told me the house was his now. And I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, not because I was afraid, but because my husband had already given me the greatest inheritance of all. My voice, my dignity, and the courage to remember that growing older does not mean surrendering your life. Sometimes the people who love us forget who we are. Sometimes grief changes families. Sometimes fear creates terrible mistakes. But home is never simply walls, property, or deeds. Home is respect. Home is memory. Home is love. And in the end, when the notary finally called my name, she didn't give me a house. She gave me back myself. After losing Robert, I believed grief was the hardest thing a person could endure. I was wrong. Sometimes the hardest part is remaining invisible while the people you love slowly stop seeing you. Age can make people underestimate us. Loneliness can make us surrender our voices. Fear can convince us that keeping peace is more important than protecting ourselves. But life taught me something different. Love does not require surrender. Family does not require silence. And forgiveness does not require forgetting. Robert's greatest gift was not the legal documents, the trust, or the protection he arranged. His greatest gift was reminding me that my life still mattered. My decisions still mattered. My voice still mattered. Ethan made painful mistakes. Fear and desperation changed him. But people are not only the worst thing they have done. Real change begins when someone accepts responsibility and chooses to become better. If you are growing older, please remember this. You are not a burden. You are not an obstacle. You do not become less valuable because time has passed. Your experiences matter. Your memories matter. Your home, your choices, and your dignity matter. And if someone asks you to surrender your peace for their comfort, you have every right to say no. Thank you for spending this journey with Kylie Morgan and her family. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a difficult family situation? What would you have done in Kylie's place? Please tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. Your stories and experiences may help someone else feel less alone. And if you enjoy emotional family stories about healing, forgiveness, and finding strength later in life, please like and subscribe so we can continue sharing these journeys together.